Hi, in this video, I want to introduce you to the development module and how to do some post-production, some development on your file. All photos, especially photos that were taken raw, will need a little bit of development. It might not be very much, it might be just a little bit of an adjustment, or it might be more major. We don't like to use development to fix photos, but we want to use it to enhance them. Now, to get to development, I'm just going to select the photo that I want to develop, and I go to the Develop panel, and it pulls it up in the center, and I'm ready to get started. Remember when you change modules, that all the information on the side changes? So right now, we have a bunch of these. We're going to get into these a little bit later, but do notice up here we have the Navigator. This is actually very helpful. We can move around the file, and it's actually picking up on this. So it's actually navigating around to a specific scale. And this shows you what part of the photo you're looking at. I generally like to look at it from anywhere from 1 to 2 to 2 to 1 in order to just analyze it. And then if you want to just put it back, you just click Fit. Now, that is an important start to when you're getting ready to work with a file, because the first thing you want to make sure of is that it is a file worth working with. Before I go back to that, I want to just hit the I button and pull up the information. So right now, this comes up on our file. It tells us when we made it, the name of the file. It also down here tells us how big the file is. This is 6,000 by 4,000 pixels, which is a pretty standard size crop frame sensor off of a decent camera. It's about a 24 megapixel camera. That's a pretty good sized file. I'm going to come back to that and show you what happens as we work with the file a little bit. Now, the first thing that I'm going to check is whether or not this is in focus, whether or not it has camera shake, and whether or not the resolution looks good. So again, I'm going to be at the 2 to 1, and I always go right in with a bird photo. I want to go right into the bird's eye and his feathers, because I want to make sure that those are in focus. And you notice if you get really close, there's definitely a little bit of a loss of, a little softness, a little loss of resolution. Part of this has to do with the type of file we're working with, but the eye looks nice and sharply focused. We can see the little lures and we can see the feathers. So this looks like a good file to work with. Okay, once I get done with that, then I'm going to come over to the right side and I'm going to start working my way through the development panel. I start with the histogram. I'm not going to change anything in the histogram, but I always double check it. This is the original version, and you're going to be checking to make sure that you don't have any blacks that are clipped off or any whites that are clipped off in important areas. This histogram looks pretty good for what I'm doing. Got a little bit low in exposure. The blacks are all down here. I would have liked to have seen it a little bit further over, but it's totally workable. It's not clipped off. So that looks good. Once we get past that, we can actually take a look at this little panel. Now, most of the tools here are what we call local development tools, and we want to do a global development. So the difference is a global development tool develops the whole photo. A local one develops little parts of it. We always start with global and then work our way down to local. This is the crop tool, and it is a global tool because it's going to crop the whole photo. These, and you notice as you hover over it, you get a little message, spot remover, red eye, radial, graduated filter, radial filter, and spot and adjustment brush. These are all local, but we will start with the crop. I usually do crop my photos, but I try not to crop them too much. With birds, occasionally, it gets a little more extreme, but you want to crop as little as you need to, as you can get away with, and still get the strength of your photo. Now, I can just bring this in. If it's locked, it's going to come in. Notice if I grab it, this little lock is on. It's going to do it proportionately. If I want to move the sides independently, I just unlock it, and then I can move these in. That's probably what I do, just to center more on the woodpecker itself. The other thing I can do, which is very handy, is I can click here, and I can choose an aspect ratio. In this case, I might choose 1:1, which is a square, and move it around. Now, watch what has already happened up here. It went from 4,000 to 6,000 to 4,000 to 4,000. So it'll tell you right away on that information panel how much resolution you're losing. This is one reason why I encourage you, we'll go back here and show you, not to attempt something like this. And this is tempting with digital files, to just say, oh, I'm just going to do just his head. Look what happened to the file. It's now just over 1,000 by 1,000. That's a very small file. So we're actually not going to do that. We're going to go here and step back. Whoops. And we'll go back to fit. Oop. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. There we go. Okay, so we are back. I just did a Command Z to go back to that crop that we did. Now let's move down from there. We'll go to the basic panel menu. And this is the main thing that we're going to do today. I'm not going to get too much into these lower panels. I just want to show you the basic development panel. And again, I like to work from the top to the bottom. Okay, so the profile for now, don't worry about it. Just leave it wherever it is. But here, this first panel is what we call white balance. Now, you might not have noticed it, but this photo is a little bit blue. If we zoom in to the bark here, you can see that it's quite cool. And that's because it was shot in the shade with the camera on daylight, and it just lost a lot of its warmth. Now, this probably is the color that the light really was, but it's not the color that I want the light to be. Now, there's a few different ways I can adjust this. I can actually try an auto adjustment, which is actually pretty good in this case, although I think it made it a little bit purpley. You can try to pick one of these presets. That is better because that is actually how I shot it, was in the shade. Or you can do a custom one. Let's go back to as shot and let's do custom down here. There's a couple different ways to do custom. I could actually just play with the sliders here. Go from blue to warm, red to green, magenta to green. Now, that can work, but you have to have a very delicate hand. There's another way that I actually really prefer, and this takes a little bit of practice, but it's very, very effective. You can click this little icon, find something that should be neutral gray, not white or black, and not a color, something that should be very neutral, and just click on that, and it will actually warm it up. And actually, I like that quite well. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Now I'm going to move down to this area. This is probably the most important area that you'll be into. And this has to do with your tonal range. That is how dark or how light or how high contrast different areas are. It's a lot to choose from here. We're all probably familiar with just bringing exposure up and down, and you can see how that works. Contrast changes the relationship of lights and darks. And I'm going to do these separately just so you can see and then talk about what I would do. Then we have the highlights. And the highlights just control the brighter but not completely white areas of an image. The shadows, which control just the darkest but not the completely black area of the images. White, which just pulls up the very whitest areas. And shadows, blacks, which just control the very blackest areas. Now, this effect that you're getting is when you've pushed your histogram over so that it starts to actually clip. It turns blue on the left. And if we do the same thing here, it turns red when it gets pure white. So all of these usually need to be used with sort of subtlety. For this image, I'm probably going to bring the exposure up just a little bit. And then I'm going to go in, probably leave the highlights where they were. And the reason I say that is because it looks like the highlights are nice and bright. The highlights would be these areas, but they have texture and detail. The shadows, however, I feel like need a little more what I call openness. So notice how when I do the shadows, it's not changing those highlights at all, just those deepest areas. Lets us see a little bit more of the feathers. And I also might change the whites. Now, just very subtle. You don't want to go too far, obviously. But if I just bring it up a couple of points, it's just going to brighten up the whole image slightly. Now, a couple other very important things down in presence. Presence is a very cool area, and I'm going to describe these each in a little bit of detail. So texture is a very new one. Texture actually kind of crisps up the edges of things. So let's zoom into the feathers. And you can see that it just sort of takes the edges and sharpens them up a bit. You can definitely go too far with any of these. I'm just going to bring it up a little bit. And then clarity. Clarity, I'm going to actually go over here to show you clarity. Clarity actually increases the contrast in the middle tone areas. So you can see it separates those out. And again, you can go way too far with clarity. I'm just going to do a little bit. Very nice. The dehaze we won't use for this one, but I'll show it for you in another one. The dehaze actually takes off the overall haze. It's going to be very handy for a file that I show you in a future video. The vibrance and saturation. Let me just zoom into the head to show you this. I'm going to take these off so you don't need to see those. So vibrance will actually increase the saturation of tones that are already present. So watch this. It's going to make that red very bright and the yellow, the brightest part of the yellow very, very, very bright. But it's not really touching everything. Saturation will bring those up much more equally. So it's a little more heavy-handed. Generally, I just bump my saturation, my vibrance up just the tiniest bit. And there you go. I'm going to take the clarity down a tiny bit. That got a little heavy-handed. I like the clarity, and I love the texture. I'm going to leave it there.